Hello everybody, I am Chris Baker from LuckyGunner.com and I have COVID, but I'm not going to let that stop me because I really want to talk about this gun today. I'm not going to give you any advice or any recommendations. I didn't do any testing. I've just got an interesting old gun I want to talk about. So, with apologies to Ian McCollum, who always does a much better job with this kind of thing, we are going to take a look at the High Standard Sentinel. This is a 9-shot double-action revolver chambered for .22 long rifle. You guys know I love revolvers and small caliber pocket pistols, especially when they are well designed. The Sentinel is not an especially well-known gun, but it's got some well thought out features that were innovative for the time, including a couple that I would still like to see on more of today's Snubby revolvers. Various iterations of the Sentinel were made from 1955 until around 1984. This particular sample is from 1969. During that era, Smith & Wesson and Colt were, of course, the dominant names in double-action revolvers. High Standard was around. They'd been making guns since the 30s, but they did not have any revolvers. They were best known for their semi-automatic .22 target pistols. The Sears Roebuck department store chain was a partner and a major shareholder of High Standard at the time, so they asked them to design a so-called tackle box revolver. It had to be low cost, had to be a double action .22 long rifle with a 9-shot capacity, and that was probably to compete with other 9-shot .22 revolvers that were on the market, like those in the H&R 900 series. The man High Standard assigned to this task was a 33-year-old designer named Harry Seyfried. Seyfried had recently come from Winchester, where he had worked on a number of different rifle designs, but he's probably better known for the work that he did later on at Ruger in the 60s and 70s. Among other things, he helped to design the Ruger Red Hawk, the Security 6, the Mini 14, and also the rotary magazine for the Ruger 1022. But back at High Standard, Seyfried completed the design of the Sentinel from start to finish in just 3 months. He borrowed elements from several existing designs and came up with a few of his own. It's fairly unique for a mid-century revolver design. Guns Magazine went as far as to call it the first new revolver in 50 years. The only screws it has are the grip screws. The frame is in 2 pieces and it's held together by these 2 pins. The earlier models only had the single pin in the rear here. The frame is aluminum and the cylinder and the barrel are both steel. It weighs 20 ounces unloaded. That's about as much as an all-steel 2-inch Smith & Wesson J-frame, but it's a bit larger than a J-frame. It's a lot closer in size to something like a Ruger SP101. So it's not as light as a modern .22 Snubby like the Ruger LCR or a Smith 43C, but it is light relative to its size. Sears offered the Sentinel under their J.C. Higgins brand and called it the Model 88 Fisherman. There was also a version made for Western Auto labeled as the Revelation Model 99. In 1955, the advertised price for a new Sentinel was $34.95. That is roughly equivalent to $375 in today's money, which is close to what a modern budget revolver costs. Just 3 or 4 years ago, it was not uncommon to find pre-owned Sentinels in like-new condition for well under $300. But just like everything else in the firearms market, the prices have risen dramatically in the last couple of years. We picked up this one for about $500, and it's far from pristine. It is in great shape mechanically. It does not appear to have been fired much at all, but the nickel finish is pretty well worn in several places. The original Sentinels were available with 3 or 6-inch barrels and a black oxide finish. The 2-inch snub nose models and the nickel plated finish like this one did not become options until a year or 2 later. Up until 1974, Sentinels all had plastic grips. Some of them were a 2-piece like this one with a screw on either side. Others were a single piece with just 1 screw at the bottom. The Snubby models had a round butt grip frame, while the longer barrels had a more traditional square butt. The square butt frames were supposedly very comfortable to use. That seems to come up a whole lot in articles about these guns. Personally, I don't really care for the grip on this round butt model. For double action shooting, it really needs more meat here behind the trigger guard. It could use something like one of those grip adapters that you often see installed on old-style Colt and Smith revolvers. Some of the early 2-inch Sentinels were available with a colored finish they called Duratone. They came in pink, turquoise, and gold, and they're among some of the most rare variants of the Sentinel today. These were not the first revolvers marketed specifically to women. That had been going on for decades, but the Sentinel is the first gun I'm aware of that came in special colors to try to appeal to female shooters, or more likely to men who thought that's what their wives wanted. The Sentinel went through several minor changes over the years designated by model numbers, starting with R100 through R109. In 1975, High Standard discontinued the R series completely and made some bigger changes to the design. The Sentinel Mark I was a .22 long rifle with a full barrel shroud, an all-steel construction instead of aluminum, and they replaced the plastic grips with wraparound wood grips. The Mark IV was the same thing, chambered in .22 Magnum. Those both came with different barrel lengths and styles of sights. There was even a version that came with interchangeable .22 long rifle and .22 Magnum cylinders. High Standard also released a Mark II and a Mark III Sentinel, but those were actually rebranded .357 Magnum revolvers made by Dan Wesson. They only did that for a couple of years in the mid-70s. The .22 models continued production until sometime around 1984. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this particular gun. The first thing that stands out is that there's no cylinder release latch on the frame. To open the cylinder, you just pull the ejector rod forward and it swings out like that. You push on the rod to eject the empty shells, just like any modern double-action revolver. The early versions of the Sentinel did not have a spring-loaded ejector rod, so you had to manually return the ejector into the cylinder before you closed it. You can almost always spot one of those models because there will be ugly scratch marks on the frame where previous users had tried to close the cylinder without pulling the ejector back in place. All versions of the Sentinel feature an internal hammer block safety. The firing pin is fixed. You can see it right there on the end of the hammer. So this doesn't have like a modern transfer bar system, but there is a little piece in here that prevents the hammer from coming into contact with the shells unless the trigger is pressed. So right now I can push on the hammer and it does not move. You can't really see it probably from your angle, but the firing pin is not protruding through the cylinder window. It's resting on the firing pin safety that's inside here. But if I pull the trigger and pin it down, now you can see I can push the hammer forward a little bit so that the firing pin can contact the primers. So that means this gun should be relatively drop safe, and it would be safe to carry with all 9 chambers loaded. The double action trigger on this particular gun is not great. It breaks at about 14 pounds. The trigger face is squared off and serrated like a target style trigger, which is actually counterproductive for double action shooting. At the very end of the trigger pull, after everything is locked up, you got this little extra travel you have to pull through when you would expect the trigger to have already broken. Sometimes it feels like the trigger kind of wants to bind up right there a little bit. The single action is not bad. I measured that at 5 pounds, but it feels lighter than that, probably because the double action is so heavy. I guess if you bought this to shoot snakes and squirrels from your fishing boat, you're probably going to use it primarily in single action. That said, some of the early snub-nose versions came with a bobbed hammer, so it was effectively double action only, and clearly meant as more of a self-defense oriented pocket pistol. The ad here does show what looks like a outdoorsman kind of guy, but the ad copy says that it's a handgun for the man of action, whatever that means. It also says it would make a beautiful home protection gift for your lady. Unfortunately, if the trigger on this particular gun is typical for a Sentinel, the shooter would need quite a bit of experience with double action shooting to be truly proficient beyond just a couple of feet. I know some of you probably cringed when I dry fired this thing a minute ago. It is generally a bad idea to dry fire older guns, especially older rimfire guns. The problem with dry firing 22s is that when there is no cartridge rim for the firing pin to strike, it hits the chamber face instead, and that can cause wear on the chamber and also on the firing pin. and oftentimes the firing pin will just break. But Sefried included a little design feature to help mitigate that issue. The cylinder face has these little slots machined into it, so if there's no cartridge, that relief cut prevents the firing pin from striking the cylinder face. I would still not make a habit of dry firing this gun simply because it's old and replacement parts are hard to find. But it is nice to know that the occasional dry fire is probably not going to immediately ruin it. Finally, I want to point out the sights on this gun. They are excellent for a snub-nose revolver, whether we're talking about 1955 standards or 2022 standards. Sefried was proud of the accuracy this revolver was capable of. Even though he was working within some tight budget restrictions, he did not simply put an integral trench-style rear sight on the top strap. He found a way to get a windage adjustable dovetail rear sight on here. The rear sight notch is a decent size with a tall front sight, but they're still low profile enough to be carry friendly. From a bench at 25 yards, I was getting 3-inch groups with CCI mini mags. Now that's not target pistol accurate, but it's definitely respectable for a 50-year-old Snubby. I have tested modern service-size pistols that can barely shoot 3-inch groups. So this is a gun that deserves decent sights, and I'm glad it has them. Now, ultimately, for me, a big part of what makes a revolver fun to shoot is a smooth double-action trigger. I like them to be around 8 to 12 pounds. After the first box of ammo, the trigger on this gun is a bit of a chore to deal with. I love the design. I love the look. But between the trigger and the grip, it would not be my first choice for a fun old 22 plinking pistol. I probably wouldn't try to use it as a defensive training revolver either. If you like shooting single action, you might have more fun with one of these. I have noticed the non-Snubby models tend to sell for a little less than the 2-inch versions. It'll probably never happen, but I would love to see someone try to revive and improve this design with some modern materials. A lightweight 9-shot 22 Magnum with a 3-inch barrel would be especially cool. That's all I've got for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Next time you need some ammo, be sure to get it from us with lightning fast shipping at luckygunner.com. I am going to go take a nap.